opens in an interesting fashion. It says, these are the generations of Jacob. But then it goes on to tell us about Joseph and his early relationship with his brothers. When we consider the story by taking a deeper look into the Hebrew, we're going to find that it's more than just a story about sibling rivalry. We find a message telling us to stay true to the word of Elohim in all that we speak and all that we listen to. If we consider that, and we consider the Ve'ahavta that we recite prior to service, we recite in English, the Ve'ahavta says, you shall love Yehovah your Elohim with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength. It also says, set these words which I command you this day upon your heart. Teach them faithfully to your children. Speak them in your home and on your way, when you lie down and when you rise up. Bind them as a sign upon your hand, and let them be a symbol before your eyes. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. When we think about that, when we really, really sit down and read into the Ve'ahavta, everything that we do is based on what we know, how we perceive the truth. So it's very important that we feed in the right place. And we've been kind of on a theme here lately about how falsehood crept in, how things got distorted. And the theme continues on through Ve'asev. And it's the story of Joseph, and the story of his captivity comes after that, and we read a lot of things about this. But we really, really need to focus on that we need to be able to worship in spirit and in truth. It was, I can't remember the rabbi, but he was asked to condense the entire Torah into something he could say during the time that he could stand on one foot. It was in the Ottoman Empire, and the rabbi stood on one foot, and he said, the entire Torah is to seek Elohim and live. We find this verse in Amos, but everything about the Torah, everything that we learn in not just the Torah, but in the prophets, the writings, everything that Yeshua taught, and even everything in the epistles is telling us to seek Elohim for our very lives. So we read verse 2, which says, these are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren. Being still a lad, even with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought evil report of them unto their father. Now, when we read, these are the generations of Jacob, we say, oh boy, here comes another one of those long-winded genealogies. But in this case, we begin to read about Joseph. And Joseph pretty much continues to be the continuing theme throughout the balance of Bereshit. The story of Joseph is kind of a hinting within the story of Joseph of what's going to happen with Israel, of their straying into idolatry. And because they strayed into idolatry, they're eventually going into captivity. And they're coming out of captivity clean, but they're eventually straying into idolatry again, and straying into what we call now rabbinical Judaism, which is really a path that's moving away from Torah. And we also see this as being kind of a hinting as to what's going on, or what began to go on after Yeshua and after John passed away at about 100 AD, that the teachings of Yeshua and the Talmidim, his taught ones, disciples, is a Greek word. These were actually men who learned under Yeshua, that their teachings started to get taken off into directions they didn't need to go until we had one giant surge that took, we want to call it the church, into captivity under Constantine. And the church became ruled under the Roman Catholic Church that dragged the teachings of Yeshua and dragged the teachings of the Torah basically into idolatry. And now, since that time, since the Reformation, the church is slowly, I mean, we're talking about molasses flowing outside in Burrow, Alaska, slowly making teshuvah. It's slowly turning around. Just recently, we see people starting to understand we have to get back to our Hebraic roots. Unfortunately, even our Hebraic roots, as they're taught today, are infected. We have the beliefs of Christianity with the sprinkling of Hebrew words. In Judaism, the teachings of the rabbis take precedence over the Torah. In fact, within the Talmud it says that even should heaven itself tell us that we're wrong, heaven is wrong, saying that Elohim is wrong, that only the rabbis can determine what the word of Elohim says. Keeping all that in mind, let's take a look at what this Torah portion has to tell us. What does "these are the generations of Jacob" tell us? The word toladot is a word that means an account of someone and the results of their actions, as well as what came forth from these actions. We could actually read this to say that these are the results or proceedings of Jacob. If we say that Jacob means supplanter, it means to hold back, it means to hold the heel. If we have an idea that Jacob means to hold something back, then we can actually say these are the results of holding back. Next we begin to read Joseph being 17 years old. So how do we see anything that has to do with holding back in the fact that Joseph was 17 years old? Joseph means that Yahuwah has added. The root of Joseph is yasaf, meaning to increase or to do again. So if we add this idea to our initial phrase, the results of holding back are to do something over and over, increasing the tendency to be repetitive in something. We start to get an idea. So let's consider 17 years old. In this, we're going to consider first the word shana, which means years. This word also means a lifetime, but it comes from a similar root that means to repeat, to do again, to alter, or to change, which leads us back to our initial statement. The results of holding back are to do something over and over, increasing the tendency to be repetitive in something or to alter it within our lifetime. Now, the next word to consider here is old. Well, there's not really a word for old in this verse. The word used is ben. It doesn't mean old, it means son. So the phrase should actually read a son of 17 years. In the word ben, though, we have a root bana, which means to establish. So if we take that and add it into our idea, then we're going to get something that the results of holding back are to do something over and over, increasing the tendency to be repetitive in something or to alter it and establish it in our lifetime. In parentheses it says, as being truth. We do something enough times, it becomes the truth to us. If we believe something enough times, it becomes the truth. Whether it's right or wrong, it becomes the truth. Okay?
Oh, absolutely.
So it's important to keep in mind that if we are doing the right things consistently, over and over, we should continue to do so. But if not, we have to change and seek the right way. In 17, we have esred, which means teen or 10, that comes from a primitive root ashar, that means to be wealthy or to pretend to be wealthy. Now, if we're doing things the right way, then we are walking in true wealth. But if we're doing things the wrong way, then we have a pretense of wealth, but we're far from it. In other words, we may have a form of reverence, but we deny the power of the reverence. Now, we also have in 17 the word Shiva, which means 7, that comes from the root Shabbat, meaning to swear or to take an oath. In Tuesday night's Torah study, we talked about Shabbat again, that we can take an oath of righteousness, but we can also, if we're led astray, take an oath to a curse. That is to allow a doctrine that doesn't line up with the word of Elohim, and we say that this is the truth, and we teach this to be the truth. We are basically swearing to a curse. Okay? A familiar root to these is sabah, which means to be satisfied. So if we take this and add it into the idea that we're developing, we have the results of holding back are to do something over and over, increasing the tendency to be repetitive in something, or to alter it, and establish it in your lifetime as being the truth. We swear by it, and we are satisfied in the wealth, or the pretense of wealth, that comes from it. So the idea so far is one of accepting or not accepting doctrinal norms that may or may not be in the line or in line with the word of Elohim. We can take that one step further. We're at work. We know that something has to be done in a certain way, but we get a memo that says you're to do it a slightly different way. But you know that if you do it the slightly different way, it's going to cause a whole bunch of problems. So there's a decision that has to be made. Do you continue to do it the right way, or do you do it the wrong way, or do you speak up and say, this isn't going to work. It's going to cost us X amount more money. It's going to destroy the materials in this. It's going to cause a hydraulic failure if we do this. Do we have the responsibility to say something, or do we just simply say, okay, I agree, and that's what I'm going to put into my belief system? And it's the same thing doctrinally. Is the doctrine that I take in, does it go contrary to the Torah? Does it go contrary to the word of Elohim? If I apply it to my life, I'm responsible for that, because what we read in the Be'ahafta, it says, I am going to talk about it on my way when I come home, when I lay down, when I get up. I'm going to teach it to my children. I'm going to talk to my neighbors about it. I'm even going to nail it up on my door. So we are responsible for what we believe. Now, the idea so far is one of accepting or not accepting doctrinal norms that may or may not be in line with the word of Elohim. We continue in the verse. Says, was feeding the flock with his brethren, being still a lad. The first word that we come to is hayah. It means to be, to become, and to come to pass. The root of this word is hava, which means to exist or to fall. Now our next word is ra'ah, which means to pasture, to feed, and to shepherd. But it also means to devour, to wander, and to waste. Spell ra'ah. Like this. every little piece within what we're reading. Because we can take this and in Ra'ah, in the words that we've just discussed, we can see a paradox begin to unfold. It says we can exist if we feed in the right pasture and allow the word of Elohim to shepherd us, or we can wander away from the pasture and either waste away or be devoured by the falsehoods inspired by Satan, who goes about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. We must pay attention to whose authority we perceive. And within Ra'ah, we say the hey, the first time that we say hey, or see hey is the root of a word in Torah, is in the word behold. It means pay close attention. This is important. So, behold, pay attention. Of what? There's the resh, authority. And we say what about the ayin? The ayin is perception. What do we perceive? Whose responsibility is it to be perceptive? Is it the pastor, the preacher, the minister, the televangelist, the rabbi? Is that the person who's responsible for your perception? Or are we individually responsible for being able to rightly divide the word of truth? Now, we must pay attention to whose authority we perceive. And we see this spelled out in the Hebrew of Ra'ah, which means to feed. What we perceive is what feeds us. Now, the word for brethren is This word also means having a resemblance. In this case, Joseph was with what resembled him, or whom he would or could come to resemble. He was with his brothers. He was with those who he resembled, or by whose influence he would come to resemble, or could come to resemble, if he allowed it. So considering what we've read, we'll consider who he was with. First, we consider the word lad, which is na'ar. This word, aside from meaning boy, also means servant. But it comes from a similar root. When I say similar root, it's spelled the same, just the verbiage is a little different. That means to shake out and to be empty. So let's take a look at this from the story standpoint. Joseph is Jacob's favorite son, and he has spent a lot of time with Jacob learning. Jacob, when he was a child and as a young man, studied at the feet of Shem and Eber. Shem was one of the sons of Noah, who had survived the flood, who was righteous, and whose job it was to let people know about Yahuwah Elohim, who he was, how to serve him, what to do, how to walk with Elohim, because Noah walked with Elohim. He taught Eber, who was his son, to do the same thing. So Jacob spent a lot of time learning the truth. Jacob studied with Shem and Eber, learning the intricacies of the word of Elohim at their feet. Joseph would have learned these truths as well from Jacob. He was his favorite son. As a young boy, he would have sat on Jacob's lap. Jacob would have taught him the truth, what he learned from Shem and Eber. Joseph knew. With this in mind, let's consider now that he's in a field with the resemblance of his brethren, who we will find in a moment are the sons of Jacob's concubines and not the sons of Leah. Is he being emptied of something and filled with something else? Okay? We know the truth. We know what the word says. But we go somewhere and we hear this great lesson from somebody. And all of a sudden, we don't bother to check it out. But this great lesson has subtleties in it that drag us away from the truth, that drag us away from Torah, and now we're heading in a different direction. Joseph was in the field with